it's about time, man. He's about the meanest teacher in the high school. One went off in our house, we had to move. Some chitlins my grandmother ain't clean yet.
Known for his iconic role as Dupree in the famous show The Wayan Bros, Jermaine Hopkins has served as one of the best faces of comedy for the black comedy show community.
Kiss? Money, what you gonna do, sweetheart? I ain't got all day. Do what you told. Give me a kiss. Yeah, I know it.
Bringing laughter to the screen of many. But recently, the actor has come out to make some things known about his time on the set of the Wayans family show, and what he revealed is shocking. What did he say about working with the Wayans family? Join us as we dive into this juicy story. The shocking truth about working with the Wayans family. There is a moment in every long-running comedy where the laughter becomes a shield, protecting power from scrutiny and turning memory into something smooth, friendly, and incomplete. The Wayan Bros is remembered as a show that was light, fast, and endlessly quotable. But behind the famous punchy jokes and the comfort of nostalgia stood a shocking story that was never told. Jermaine Hopkins was there, visible enough to be remembered and invisible enough to be forgotten. And after decades of silence, his decision to speak up forces a harder look at how comedy empires actually function once the cameras stop rolling and the hierarchy settles in, revealing behind-the-scenes experiences of control, influence, and creative exclusion that few outsiders ever see. His revelations are not just a memoir of personal experience. They are an unmasking of the subtle mechanisms that dictate who gets heard, who gets seen, and who ultimately benefits in the television business. What he is about to reveal will make you question just how many smiling faces were ever allowed to speak their truth, and how many were contained to serve the comfort of a brand. Jermaine Hopkins arrived on the Wayan Bros set with a resume that carried weight, complicating the story audiences preferred to hear. Before sitcom lighting and laugh tracks, he had already stood toe-to-toe with authority figures in Lean on Me and navigated moral collapse in Juice, performances that grounded him in realism and made a name for him in the sitcom comedy industry. At 14 years of age, Hopkins fell into the acting business when his mother brought him to a cattle call audition in New York for the Warner Brothers feature film Lean on Me, a starring role as Thomas Sams, a misguided drug-abusing high school student.
Please let me back, sir. I have to get back in school. I can't go home and tell my mom I got kicked out of school.
His next project, Juice, helmed by Ernest R. Dickerson, had him starring as Steele alongside Samuel L. Jackson, Omar Epps, and Tupac Shakur. Hopkins subsequently starred in the HBO worldwide release Strapped, which would be Forrest Whitaker's directorial debut. Over the next 2 years, Hopkins appeared in episodes of Murder One and Moshe, and 6 episodes as Dupree on the Wayans Brothers series, before finishing production on his next film, How to Be a Player, starring opposite Bill Bellamy and comedian Pierre Edwards. He did not come to television chasing validation, but opportunity, and the show offered exactly that on the surface, a visible platform attached to one of the most powerful black comedy families in Hollywood. Quietly, however, it also offered a lesson in who controlled creative oxygen and who was expected to survive on what little filtered down. Jermaine, who had climbed up from an ordinary life as a teenager to the life of a comedy star, could not have known that talent alone was never enough. Alignment with the priorities of the leads and the production team was equally, if not more, important. How he found out was shocking. Even as far back as 1987, the Wayans family was already a force to be reckoned with in the film industry. The show Wayan Bros was not simply a sitcom but a brand extension, fiercely protected and carefully managed by the talented family members and the crews that oversaw the production. Sean and Marlon Wayans were not only the leads, but the nucleus around which the writers, directors, and performers rotated, their proximity dependent on alignment rather than experimentation. Jermaine Hopkins' character Dupree entered as a wild card, someone who could disrupt scenes, bend the energy, and steal the focus of the audience when allowed, making him both a useful and risky character. Early episodes suggested flexibility, hinting that Dupree could evolve beyond comic relief, But flexibility in a tightly owned universe has limits, and those limits revealed themselves slowly, often disguised as small production decisions. The challenge for Jermaine was to navigate a landscape where visibility was prized, yet always conditional, where every moment of laughter he provoked was a subtle measure of how far he could push without upsetting the established order of the show. On set, these decisions arrived quietly. Scripts were altered between table reads and tapings, jokes trimmed in rehearsal, and once weighty scenes were softened until they posed no threat to the established center. Before getting the role, Jermaine had been made to believe that his character would get creative freedom, but that was far from the truth of what actually happened behind the scenes. After a few episodes, he noticed how often his strongest moments were repositioned to serve reaction for other more highly regarded characters rather than action, how the laughter in the show was encouraged, but direction was controlled. This precision was only possible when authority is unquestioned, and growth, which requires permission, was rarely granted. Silence from the upper management became a strategic shield, instead of outrightly risking surrender. Watching it unfold, Jermaine understood that his own visibility was being carefully managed, and that the laughter of audiences often masked the very limits set to contain him. The question that would haunt him for years was simple yet powerful. How much of what you see on screen is real, and how much is meticulously arranged to preserve the illusion of equality among the actors? Every scene, every line, was a negotiation between expression and the boundaries defined by a family empire protecting its star power. But he was not the only one. Several actors who passed through similar spaces on other Wayans projects have since described comparable dynamics, always carefully and often years later, noting how collaboration existed until it brushed against ownership. Comedians and writers working adjacent to the family have spoken about ideas being welcomed verbally, only to be dismissed later with no solid reasons, a pattern that protected the image of the powerful family while limiting the impact of smaller actors. Jermaine did not need confirmation at the time, but hearing it later reframed his experience as part of something larger rather than isolated discomfort. The silence around it was not coincidence. It was a culture and understanding that pattern would take him years of subdued silence. By the end of his first season, Jermaine had seen enough to understand that permission was not given freely, and that every laugh he drew carried an invisible boundary line, a line that no actor dared cross without consequence. That boundary shaped his behavior, his performance choices, and ultimately his understanding of Hollywood itself. At first, it had been manageable for Jermaine, but according to the veteran actor, the situation only got worse. The struggle of power dynamics and creative ceilings. As the show matured, the imbalance grew more apparent, and this was where Jermaine's optimism collided with reality. Dupree's appearances became strategic rather than natural and comedic. His character was inserted where energy was needed, and removed when narrative depth threatened to remove the spotlight from the star actors, who were the Wayans brothers, Sean Wayans and Marlon Wayan. Jermaine understood what was being lost creatively. He envisioned moments for Dupree that extended beyond corny punchlines, hinting at vulnerability, contradiction, and consequence. These ideas were dismissed in rooms where the final word belonged elsewhere, and comedy, which moves fast, had little patience for meaning that slowed the rhythm of the show. The tension between audience engagement and executive control became clearer with every episode. Fans laughed at Dupree's antics without ever realizing that each scene had been meticulously curated to avoid the possibility that Jermaine might overshadow the leads or even get anywhere close to being a major focus on the show. Every creative instinct he brought to the role was filtered through a system that prioritized the continuity of the Wayans brand over individual growth. The Wayans brothers have often been praised for building opportunities for others, and such praise is not entirely misplaced. Yet opportunity does not always equal autonomy. Providing a seat at the table does not guarantee freedom to speak once seated. Jermaine's presence served to make the show smoother and more enjoyable, but the show rarely served his own personal growth. revealing how generosity and control can coexist comfortably. From the outside, the inclusion appeared authentic, but once the cameras stopped rolling, everything changed. The opportunities became conditional. Decisions were made in executive offices, favoring the family brand, while talented actors beyond the tight-knit family were sat on and made to look smaller than they were. In several interviews, writers and production assistants who worked on the series have reflected on the unspoken rules, yet the truth remains that no supporting actor could challenge the family vision without risking reduced screen time, a limitation that was rarely visible to audiences but immediately understood by those on set. Jermaine recognized the pattern early and adapted, performing within invisible lines to avoid conflict while trying to leave his mark wherever possible. Industry observers have long noted that sitcoms controlled by star producers flatten supporting roles over time, particularly when those roles resonate independently with audiences. Jermaine felt this tension, as audience reactions to Dupree remained strong while narrative investment declined. This contradiction hinted at the decisions that were being made beyond performance quality. However, confrontation was unlikely because the environment itself disarmed resistance. The humor the staff and crew found in their everyday work life with the Wayans family softened their disappointment in the management. The easy camaraderie masked hierarchy rules, and raising concerns risked being framed as humorless or ungrateful for the opportunities offered. At that point, for Jermaine and every other actor who was being subdued by the more powerful management, speaking up would have come with real career consequences. Silence was, in effect, a survival strategy, and it shaped the way Jermaine navigated professional relationships for the rest of his life. By the end of the second season, he realized that playing the game meant staying within invisible lines, and breaking them was not an option without risking professional exile. This realization was a turning point, marking the beginning of the internal negotiation between creativity and compliance. His decision to take what he could get would cost him, affecting his life and future. And what happened next was unexpected. The aftermath of a controlled fame. When the Wayan Bros ended, the narrative around it moved on without revisiting the internal dynamics that shaped it. The Black community celebrated catchphrases and chemistry, rarely asking how that chemistry was maintained or at whose expense. Jermaine's path became easier to summarize than it was to understand, especially as legal troubles in his later life became a convenient distraction from deeper questions. The complexity was simplified, and stories were turned into shorthand for cautionary tales. Yet those who knew the inner workings of the set understood that a pattern had repeated itself, and Jermaine's voice, silenced at the time, was one of many muted to preserve a dominant narrative. Fans, accustomed to lighthearted comedy, rarely considered the human cost of what appeared effortless on screen. But with the end of the show, Jermaine's situation took a turn for the worse. After his recurring role as Dupree on the Wayans Brothers, Jermaine "Huggy" Hopkins continued acting in various television and film projects, with his later career focusing on independent films and guest appearances.
I thought I wasn't nothing, but you really ain't squat.
When Jermaine Hopkins stepped away from the Wayan Bros and the character of Dupree stopped appearing in living rooms every week, the transition was not marked by a clean break or a dramatic reinvention, but by a slow thinning of opportunity that revealed how quickly television can forget those who are no longer anchored to a powerful machine. In the years immediately following the show, Jermaine continued acting, taking roles in independent films and smaller projects that required him to recalibrate his expectations, moving from the stability of network television to a landscape where work was inconsistent and often dependent on personal hustle rather than institutional backing. These roles mattered artistically, but they did not carry the same visibility, and that difference reshaped how the industry treated him, reducing a once familiar face to a reminder of a past era rather than a performer still capable of growth. Life during this period was marked by contradiction. Jermaine was still recognized in public, still approached by fans quoting lines and recalling scenes. Yet behind that recognition was an increasing sense of instability that rarely makes it into celebrity narratives. Without the buffer of a hit show or influential producers advocating on his behalf, he navigated the same pressures many former television actors face, including financial uncertainty, stalled momentum, and the psychological strain of being remembered for one role while struggling to secure the next meaningful one. The gap between public perception and private reality widened, and the industry that once benefited from his presence offered little guidance or protection once the spotlight moved on. Once things had slowed down, and it had been a few years, it put him in a difficult situation where the actor needed to figure something else out in order to afford his fast-growing family. Unfortunately, that pressure led him down a shocking path that left fans reeling. In 2011, Jermaine made headlines for all the wrong reasons when he was arrested in Arizona for allegedly buying a jaw-dropping 200 pounds of marijuana from an undercover cop. The authorities claimed that Jermaine, who was living in North Carolina at the time it happened, traveled all the way to Arizona to seal this shady deal. The Maricopa County Police had set up a sting operation, and when Jermaine took possession of the stash, they swooped in and pulled over his SUV like something out of a Hollywood script. And what did they find? A staggering $100,000 in cash chilling in the vehicle. When police searched his Arizona apartment, they allegedly uncovered another 100 pounds of weed, totaling the amount of weed discovered on Jermaine Hopkins to 300 pounds. Enough green to make anyone's head spin. Jermaine later confessed that he got involved in this risky business with the hope of providing a memorable Christmas for his family, a pressure that few people could withstand. Faced with serious charges, 2 felony counts for possession, transportation, and trying to sell marijuana, Jermaine found himself in a precarious position with a bond set at $35,000. It looked like his acting career might just take a nosedive. According to The Star, when you get busted with 300 pounds of weed, it comes with 5 years of jail time for his crimes, but he got off with 30 days in jail and 3 years probation. So just like that, he walked out a free man that very day, but the consequences didn't end there. He was also given 3 years of probation to keep him on the straight and narrow. One would think he was going to rein himself in and figure out something legitimate to do after his shocking arrest. But Jermaine Hopkins had other plans. Fast forward to October 2017, Jermaine got into another legal trouble with the law. He got pulled over in Apex, North Carolina, for overspeeding and ignoring the speed limit. He had been going a wild 70 miles per hour in a 55 miles per hour zone. At that point, he was no longer a stranger to getting arrested. Unfortunately, ignoring the speed limit was not the end of his crimes that day. When the cops stopped him, they made a jaw-dropping discovery. They found a good amount of marijuana chilling in the trunk of his car. Compared to the staggering amount that was found on him before, this one was much smaller, which indicated that it was for personal use. After he was taken into custody, Jermaine was told that he had committed a probation violation. He was charged with felony possession of marijuana and possession with intent to sell and deliver. Hopkins later pleaded guilty to felony possession. He received a suspended 4-month sentence and was placed on 24 months of supervised probation. The incident quickly overshadowed years of work and reinforced how unforgiving the entertainment ecosystem can be once an actor is no longer insulated by power. The charge itself was nonviolent and reflective of laws that, at the time, disproportionately affected black men. Yet coverage of the arrest stripped away context and nuance, reducing a complex career arc into a cautionary headline. What might have been a private legal matter became a public rebranding, one that flattened his identity into a single moment and made it easier for casting offices and audiences alike to quietly move on. What was rarely discussed was how common such encounters with the justice system were, or how the absence of institutional support amplified their consequences. Without a studio, network, or influential figures stepping in to frame the narrative, the incident became a convenient explanation for why opportunities slowed. But rather than ending his story, his experience with the law reframed it. The arrest did not erase his talent or his contributions, but it exposed how precarious life after sitcom success can be, especially for supporting actors whose value is often tied to proximity rather than investment. It also cast earlier experiences on the Wayan Bros in a harsher light, revealing them not as isolated frustrations, but as early signs of a system that prioritizes control, loyalty, and branding over long-term sustainability for those outside its core. A revelation that did not come from bitterness. With time, perspective clarified the patterns. Jermaine saw how supporting black actors often disappeared quietly, their contributions frozen in reruns while off-screen opportunities dwindled. Conversations with peers revealed shared experiences of creative ceilings imposed not by talent, but by structures designed to protect the brand. The Wayans model, successful and influential, was not exempt, even if its public image suggested otherwise. Several industry insiders, including former writers and cast members from parallel projects, described environments where ideas were openly welcomed but systematically filtered to ensure that the central figures retained narrative control. The repetition of these experiences suggested design rather than coincidence, and it underscored the difference between public perception and internal reality. After years of keeping his experience a secret, the actor made an unexpected decision to reveal them, a decision that changed his life. Years later, Jermaine Hopkins speaks with intentionality. His reflections did not dismantle the show's legacy, but they complicated it, introducing nuance where nostalgia hinted at simplicity. By naming the mechanics of creative control, he challenges the assumption that success automatically distributes fairly among contributors. The discomfort lies in plausibility, not extremity. Industry professionals who have studied executive-led comedies confirm that this pattern is consistent.
There's a bunch of women in town tonight for a cosmetic convention, okay? Now I have one woman right here who's looking for a professional man.
Showing that what happens on camera is often a curated compromise of talent, control, and brand protection. Comedians and actors from the broader Wayans ecosystem have since described similar frustrations, always diplomatically, revealing environments where loyalty was rewarded more consistently than originality. These accounts aligned with Jermaine's experience, forming a mosaic of patterns that expose the subtle, yet persistent mechanisms of power. His frustration stemmed from unrealized potential, not envy. He did not seek to outshine the brothers, only space to evolve after proving he had the talent to. That expectation was incompatible with a system built to preserve central dominance. Till today, the Wayans brothers remain cultural icons, and nothing Jermaine says changes their talent. But icons operate within systems, and systems deserve examination. Control over tone, narrative, and opportunity shaped Jermaine's environment. And acknowledging this does not negate the brothers' achievements, but it shows that not everyone had it as easy as them. Comedy has consequences even when hidden behind laughter, and power leaves fingerprints whether intended or not. Jermaine's timing is critical. Distance has removed fear of immediacy, allowing honesty to replace caution. His reflections demand recognition rather than retribution, reframing his presence from accessory to participant. Speaking now transforms silence into testimony, and testimony into accountability, even if cultural rather than legal. By sharing his story, Jermaine forces audiences to reconsider familiar narratives, understanding that power, visibility, and voice in entertainment are not distributed evenly, and that the laughter on screen often conceals the limits imposed behind it. If these systems constrain Jermaine, the question lingers: how many others who smiled for the camera were silently boxed into roles designed to showcase some while muting many? Jermaine Hopkins insists that his story is not about bitterness or blame, but about being honest with his own experiences. The Wayan Bros show remains funny and rewatchable, yet it also demonstrates how empires operate behind the scenes, who benefits from structural control, and who adapts quietly to survive it. His words open a conversation long postponed, leaving audiences to wonder how many familiar shows smile on screen while untold stories wait just off camera, and how many other actors were forced to play their part silently while those in control preserved the brand, the legacy, and their own narrative dominance. Jermaine's testimony reminds us that laughter may hide constraints, but it cannot erase the truth of what happens when creativity meets behind the scene's control. What do you think of Jermaine Hopkins' revelations? Do you think he was right to speak up about his experience? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.